All right. It's the Simplify Groups and Projects Working Group on September the 3rd. It's like, Gabe, you have the first one if you want to kick us off.
Sure. I don't see any Yoshis here. I guess I can just provide an update with this. We talked with Mike just about how we want to proceed from UX standpoint. And the basic gist is there's a strong desire to finish the groups or subgroups category maturity scoring, which is more or less doing problem validation, exposing problems with subgroups through a highly research-driven UX process. And once we do that, then I think it will help Daniel get more up to speed with the problem space and ultimately lead to a better solution. So they're going to try to get that whipped up as quick as possible. And then once that's done, Daniel will swing back in full-time as the UX designer with the support of Mike. So that's the update.
How does that play off our sort of time limits and self-imposed deadlines?
It means that we'll need to likely adjust the self-imposed deadlines. But if anything, I think like we shouldn't, at least on the engineering side, let up on the sense of urgency. That makes sense.
No, absolutely. No, but I'd appreciate a bit more time. So if it buys me a couple more weeks, that's good for me.
It should. And I think that's where Marcus was doing some good work on technical discovery. And I think if we get a little further along in collaborating on that, it looks like Natalia's here too. And even thinking about front end and how we're going to deal with the front end for things and merging everything together, like just a cohesive technical strategy. I think the solution is not going to change much, but it could. So,
yeah, I think an obvious first step is just to put the two pages, like the two things together in the most obvious way possible. And yeah, it'd be great to have somebody on front end to be able to do that.
Cool. So I'm trying to find the issue that I created for my next bullet point. It's in this epic. I'm going to grab it and link it right quick. But I created this issue. This was basically like sticky points. So when we look at, we talked about creating these organizational structure archetypes that we could use in thinking about developing features and stuff. Sticky points. Like one of the things that I immediately thought about, like if you let some object show up in a lab that's an adjacent sibling, like you immediately are going to have conflicts about labels and how labels work. One really obvious one is the relative position attribute on issues, which is like a global relative position across an entire top level namespace, I think, of a given issue. And if you share a issue across a top level namespace with another one and it shows up in the other top level namespace, then you would break the relative position, which is like the manual sorting of issues in the board and also the manual sort in the issue list. So like I'm trying to start thinking through like all the things that like are going to be like problem areas and trying to document them in one place so at least we can think through it. I don't know if you have any
would you agree
ideas,
would you agree that that sort of problem's fairly minor?
I would agree in the grand scheme of things, we would have to figure out a way to handle it is all I'm saying. Right. Cause if you have a certain, say you have 1, 2, 3 and one project and you have 1, 2, 3 and another project, and then you share issue 2 to this other project, then how do you know what the relative position ought to be in the context of a different place?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's from an engineering perspective, you just have to extract into, you just need to keep a second copy of the ordering. It's just another thing to do. That's all. That's why I say, how important is it? Because if we go to that level, there's probably going to be so many of those types of things.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to think through it because one of the things that I was coming across in iterations, I don't know if you watched the video that I recorded with my UX designer, but the basic idea is like if you, instead of like the inheritance behind the scenes being explicit about saying this group is synced with this other group's iterations, and I was thinking that was a viable solution for all the problems that like I talked about in that issue. But I'm wondering like if there's a way to basically say which thing should be the canonical owner of certain things, so that way you don't have to create a ton of duplicate tables for everything. So that's all I'm saying. I would like to not add a bunch of technical debt and simplify the system as much as possible.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. I'll keep adding that, and then we can at least take into consideration async when we look at some of the technical stuff. You're up, Alex.
All right. Okay, so I've mentioned a few times in the last month or so that I wouldn't mind, as part of this working group, putting out some sort of list of recommendations on how to not make the same sort of mistakes again. How to, maybe part of the solution that we come up with is not necessarily a technical solution, but it's a set of guidelines on how to create your next feature, or potentially how to adjust your set of features so that they can work between groups and projects or whatever, across instance level as well. So I don't know if it's probably not worth going into the specific of the example that I've linked to, but if you're interested, you can go to that issue. And I describe a potential way where we could sort of provide a solution to a set of problems that applies probably in many cases and across all sorts of different features, specifically around sort of how we share membership and how we share ownership and access to various entities. And it's the same sort of problems that I see all over the place for various features. And if we can create sort of a set of cookbook style solutions, this is the problem, this is what it looks like, and this is the solution, it's probably going to make a lot of people's lives a lot easier and sort of solve at least from my world, from the managed access world, it's going to solve those problems for those people, which is a big problem for a lot of designers and sort of product managers and so on, developing features, which leaves them with just dealing with sort of the domain problem of how do we create an on-call schedule, what does that thing look like, and they're not dealing with what level it goes to and how it's going to be shared into other groups and so on. So yeah, maybe take a look at that issue if you're interested in more detail. Over to you, Marcus.
Yeah, so I created an issue to basically start prototyping based on the discussions with Alex, and it's almost or pretty much the same approach that Alex presented last week in this diagram below, which I only saw today. But you already discussed about this earlier, like just trying to mush them together, as you said last week, and yeah, see how far we can go, basically. And one thing I noticed, like last week we discussed about the UX differences between projects and groups. And the main difference I saw is that the landing pages are different. Like projects show the code repository by default, and groups show like all the subgroups and sub-projects. So like we need to find a way to combine them. And it's also like, if a project only has the issue feature available, for example, it will use the issue listing as a landing page. And then there's another thing, like the user has a preference, which like what should be the overview page for groups, projects, and even the global dashboard on GitLab.com. So there's like, it's already dynamic, and we probably can keep and extend it.
There's currently with projects, there's an assumption that a project is actually a repository. That's why you see like the repository. And I think part of what we're working towards here is to sort of, by aggregating groups of projects, we're saying that like, I mean, we lose the concept of a project, I suppose, but we just say that like a workspace in your terminology is just a set of things, set of resources. And so I think that page would somehow embody that. You know, I leave that to Mike and
Yeah.
whoever else.
Yeah, we would work on that as part of the solution validation. It would depend on what features you want to enable. Like, you know, if we end up finding a much simpler solution and then mushing things together, then great. But in either way, right now the usability of the finding out that you can change what's on the homepage of your project and then not being able to configure it to have something that you want to be your homepage. So like, I don't know if you can set Wiki to be your homepage, but if I disable my issues and my repo, then I think Wiki automatically becomes a homepage or something like that. So it's like, we want to make it at a minimum more flexible so people can pick whatever homepages they want to start at. In the long run, it would be more of like a dashboardy type thing that also maybe could be customized based on the persona or the user role or what's important for them to see when they go to their,
Yeah, I think you'll find that, I mean, I'm taking a wild stab here, but I'd imagine that people are going to use these workspaces for specific purposes. So they may very well just enable the repository and maybe issues and something else. And there's probably going to be an implied kind of obvious use for that workspace. And I think that we could, like you say, Gabe, where, you know, if you disable various bits and pieces at the moment, well, it sort of assumes that you want it for something else. I think you'll get the same sort of behavior with the workspace. It's just that we kind of, you know, if there's nothing enabled and there's a bunch of people, well, then it's just a collection of members, and maybe you sort of show the members and the subgroups or the sub containers, whatever. I think we can do a lot of sort of reasonable assumptions through there.
Yeah, I think that's where UX will be able to help a lot with research. And if we can tailor it to personas, basically, so that you can have a different view per persona. Because I know product managers that I've talked to, especially the less technical ones, they want to go into a lab or a workspace or whatever, and they just want to see their burn down chart for their current iteration, the issues that they need to triage, do just that without having to click navigation anywhere else, and then like get out as quickly as possible. So
it would take into account your role.
Yeah. Theoretically, potentially, we'll see. That's just an idea, but that would be ideal because each role wants to see something different because they each have a different job to be done or main job is trying to accomplish with GitLab.
Another thing we could also investigate too is if, like a lot of apps, when you land in them, will always show you what was last done in descending order in that project, and it's like that way you're seeing what you did last, what your team did last. So I'm sure that's something else that research could figure out, if a unifying experience like that exposes the activity and is very common across GitLab, regardless of what you've put in your project. That's another thing to consider.
Yes, absolutely. That's where I actually said what I wanted on my homepage for GitLab was an activity feed, because there's somebody doing a UX research on it. And I was like, I really want to see an activity feed and like all the things that I want to see on my global GitLab homepage. But if you figure that out, you can have something similar that is scoped to just like a given workspace too. That's all stuff that I don't. Yeah, I think that's where I would lean on UX to provide some of those more solutions.
For sure.
So if in the technical spike, we basically like go with something that we know is going to change for what the default landing page is, that's fine. Because it's like we can change that easily. So.
Marcus, can I, while I've got you there, well, I've got some sort of basic engineering stuff that I've looked at, but I'll just breeze over it because it's really maybe only applicable to Marcus, but it might be interested to everyone else here.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, Marcus, just to sort of show you where I'm thinking, in the bottom left here is kind of a new construct, what you've called a workspace, I've called a lab. And the lab extends, it specializes on the namespace, where I'm assuming the namespace is like the core structure of the hierarchy. And a lab consists of a group and a project. and that is the aggregation. And so last week, did you watch the video last week, Marcus?
From the meeting, like
Yeah.
the working group meeting. Yeah, I watched that today.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So every group has a project, every project has a group, but ideally they're kind of hidden. We only have to do it this way to sort of retrofit the system into this new sort of idea. And so then I've created like a lab projects controller, which is really just an extension of the project controller, and a labs. I've got all the HUD in the way. So I've created the other labs groups controller, which extends the groups controller. And then in the routes, so as an example, so wherever I've got a groups route, I kind of intercept it and put this facade of a lab groups. So every time you'd access the groups controller, I kind of jump in the middle and go, here's my lab controller, I'm going to take over. And for everything that I don't want to handle, I just pass through inheritance to the groups controller. And likewise for the project. So I kind of override from the project controller, I override with my lab projects controller. And the intention there is the same, but I'll just sort of, so if you create a new group, normally, let's say it goes through the labs, it would normally go through the groups controller. It's now going to go through my lab groups controller. And in that action, I'm just going to go and create a project as well and attach it into I'm going to create a new lab, create the group that it requested, and I'm going to create this implied project and stick it into the namespace hierarchy at that location where it's been requested. And so we'll see, but the hope is that that's all sort of kind of works transparently, and the inheritance structure is all sort of maintained through the namespace hierarchy, and all the permissions are retained, and it all just magically works, but we'll see.
What about the few things where there is like very clear overlap between the group and the project? Example would be labels. You can have labels. You can create them at the group. You can create them at the project. Would you have to decide which one to canonically use?
Yes.
Okay.
And in terms of migration from what we have at the moment, every existing project will get a new group, and every existing group will get a new project. So we won't have to decide on existing sort of entities, I think. But yeah, we will have to make sort of a determination at the kind of the feature level, or whatever we want to call a lab or a workspace, however we want that to sort of actually operate, because there's no longer a concept of a group or a project. So we kind of have to make that decision anyway.
How's the best way to document that? So I've been putting off some of the duplicative issues to put things at the group or the project level to see how this would shake out. Like one example is prioritized labels. They're at the project level, but not at the group level. So that's a huge request, right? And so in that instance, I would want to say, since they're already at the project level, let's use project labels as like the label feature, right? So that we can have get the priority for free without having to rebuild it. Is that the right way to think about it?
Not sure.
Okay.
Not there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with the project and group labels and the various issues between them.
It's like milestones are the same thing, where you can create a milestone at the group level or at the project level. And so I think we kind of, if you have both that are active, then I guess we would probably have to figure out which one to.
When you say both are active, like I say, so where am I? Yeah. So all this HUD in the way, I can't do anything. So this diagram below, that I shared last week, where I showed that essentially, so if there's an existing project, say project 2, when we migrate to a lab structure, project 2 will get this second group that's kind of tightly coupled to it, and it won't. It'll just be there for the sake of creating the lab. So in this case, I would say that we'd use the project labels, whereas in this case, where we've got a group 2, group 2 gets this project attached, and in this case, I would use the group labels. I don't know if that answers you, but
that does, and that's where I was suggesting that like that doesn't solve the problem then of having to not duplicate things at the group level, if that makes sense, right? So in this example, if you look at lab 4 or lab 2, it's almost like you know that P2 can create labels, and you know that G.P2 can create labels because it's a group. The labels behave slightly different because we haven't brought parity to the group level labels. So technically the project labels behavior is more advanced than the group level labels. So we would want to pick that to be the canonical thing. So when I created lab 2, I would want the project, like that lab, to use the project labels and not the group labels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, is that partly a migration issue? I think when we create a lab construct, we're going to have to pick one to be the one that we work with. So we're going to, it's just going to be easy to say whenever you create a label in a lab, we're actually just going to make a label in a project in the labs project. Mm-hmm. In terms of migration, it's kind of we are in mushing these two things together. We're creating this issue, and we can resolve it however you like. I don't know how, technically in the engineering side, I think we could do whatever you thought was best, but I'm not sure.
I think I'll take on the task of looking at the overlap, but if the ultimate goal is to then down the road extract each feature from a group or a project so that those contracts go away, we should think about, as we're exploring this, canonically picking which feature from which group or project you want to standardize on. That way you can start extracting that. Like the first step to extracting that would be removing that feature from the other construct and relying just on that one. If it's in a group or project, and then after that would be extracting it into the out of the project, and it could be in the lab or wherever we want it to be.
That makes sense. I think that is one step after where I am at the moment. Where I'm looking at is how do we just get this stuff to aggregate? And then I think you're one step further along, which I agree with.
Okay, I'll be quiet now. That's super cool. Thank you for sharing that.
I have a question. I'm just wondering if we'd ever considered just the concept of having global labels or something, stop calling them group, but there could be ecosystem labels that are kind of everywhere and available, and then project specific ones. And I'm just thinking that because a lot of times organizations want to set up global concepts, labels, workflows, things like that. So you might be able to solve it in a simpler way if you can apply global labels or project ones and then have them both pull from different places.
Yeah, people want to create, have talked about creating labels at the instance level, which would be when we're thinking about the organization level. The other way that I thought about solving this, though, is let's say you create a lab and it's just your configuration for things. It's your labels, it's your templates, it's your whatever you want it to be. And then you share that lab, you basically check a box and say, share this by default with all other labs in my organization. right? So from one lab, you basically can set the configuration that all the other labs inherit without adding another feature like at the top level.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't know from a UX standpoint, and we'll figure out in solution validation if that's ideal. But that fits the pattern of what I've seen lots of people want, where they're like, I want this at this level and I want this at this level. Like if you have it so that you can have one lab that can drive things at whatever level you want, then
Yes.
it kind of is even more flexible than having global labels, if that makes sense.
It could also simplify it. I know we don't often prioritize non-technical users because we have a lot of engineers and people who really get these concepts. But if an organization wanted to set their company with global labels in a really simplified way, any non-technical Trello user or someone who's just wanting to create somewhere to track things, they created it, it would be set up the way the organization intended, and they wouldn't have to even be asked these questions. They could just go. And like the more simple, the better.
Yep. I think we'll get into that probably with the UX solution validation stuff, but I agree.
Okay, did you see, I'm pretty sure a couple of days ago, I wrote a comment around these labels and how they sort of, there's like this semantic issue around, you know, I think I used the example of curry, where you've got Indian curry, you've got Thai curry. We just call it curry, but they're both quite different, and the semantic sort of difference matters. So if you've got a group that uses curry, and then you've got another group that uses curry, and then you get, at the moment, I think you get curry that appears twice in the list of labels. And it's, you know, it matters the context and what the sort of the intention behind the label is. So if you're just in a lab and you have a set of labels and you share them out to everybody, if you just end up with like 10 curry labels, I don't know how useful is that. You could still, you know, I think I said in that comment, we could filter by just the string value. If that's all we're talking about, if you just care about the string, just filter by curry, well, then you just list the unique strings and just filter as though they were like tags.
I don't think they should duplicate. I think they should retain, there should be one of them that's used versus having them duplicate, because then you get it, like you mentioned, that would be very confusing. But using some of the, the global labels that we always have as PMs, like the knowledge team, create stage. Like I wouldn't want to duplicate those in every project I made. Those should just be set, and I would always go from there. But I might want to add a new design ready tag that only my team knows about or in my project. And the rest of GitLab doesn't need to see that because it's not in their main workflows.
Yep, I think that's where like I'm working to make it so that you can't have duplicated labels in any namespace hierarchy. And we could look at doing that in the organization level, but I think the same would be true. Like if you had a lab that was your labels and configuration type thing that you auto shared with all the other labs, they would all basically be able to see those labels within their own labs. And we would like have the same rules where you can't produce a duplicated label, but you can, the way that I'm looking at it right now, you can create your own unique design label in your lab, right? And then if the lab where it has all the labels, the global labels, it tries to create the same thing, it will be notified, or the user will be prompted that that label already exists in another lab that it's shared with, and offering to promote it in or something like that. Or maybe because the labs are shared, that label would automatically show up in the lab that has all the label configurations too. Which gets
I think that's it. I think you've got a global lab with that global configuration, and everybody is a member of that global lab, and they can make adjustments as required. And then within your own local lab, you can set up whatever labels you want that are different.
I think though, as well as preventing me from create knowledge in my lab is also important. So just like doing the extra work to validate it against the global ones and be like, sorry, you can't add that one here. You just use the one that's global.
Yeah, the only tricky thing is the inverse of that is if you have a lab that has a unique tag or label that's not global, and then the global lab tries to add that
Yeah.
We need to like invalidate that as well and allow them to basically promote that into the global lab space.
Yeah, agreed. Or yeah, like it's just like a promotion process. Promote to global.
We'll sort through it. I'll write something up, but I think we're at time.
All right, I was going to ask if Mike wanted to touch quickly on his last bullet, and then we can wrap.
Not on the last bullet. Actually, I've been sitting here thinking, I have a quick thing to say. I'm looking at the issue. I'm sorry, it's 218333, the simplified groups and project solution validation. And I'm wondering if we could actually do a, what's it called? Like almost like a sprint planning exercise where we generate basically issues or user stories around problem set 1. Because it is big in scope, but like we also need to talk about just, I mean, this whole conversation, we touched on all the different problems kind of like in a half hour. I like to do some kind of sprint planning meeting where we generate user story ideas, have them like visible and prioritize them by a particular theme and then deep dive on that. Is anyone interested in doing that?
I'll do that. I'm interested.
Okay.
I think that would be a good exercise to do as soon as it sounded like Alex said we're a little ahead of him, but maybe not. Just in like the actual technical implementation of how do you mush the things together, and then maybe we don't worry about that right now. We just do it based on the prioritized jobs to solution. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's.
I'm such a big thing to wrap our arms around.
Let's
I want to make it smaller.
Agenda to do that. I like that idea.
Does
that work for you, Mike?
It does. I'm just skeptical if the half hour is long enough.
I mean, we can extend it. We'll just async since we're at time. I'll go look at calendars and jump in the Slack room. And if next week doesn't work, we can look at another time.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks all. See you later.
Thank you.